Hey folks, Roland Martin of TV One, the Tom Joyner Morning Show, and you're listening to WEAC Radio. Do something.
To be a VIP for the night. Shorty in a drop-top D made it right. Pulled up to her bumper, baby, I beat twice. Jumped out my whip like I was the police. Didn't have a gun, but my wrist said freeze. Hot Friday on the DVD. She's a baller and I'm a baller. Said what? To all my hot girls live in Fiesta. To all my hot boys live in Fiesta. To all my Chi-Town people, Fiesta. To all my DC people, Fiesta. To all my players and the hustlers, Fiesta. And if you're sitting on them things, Fiesta. To all my honeys in the club, Fiesta. And if you're rolling with a thug, Fiesta. We be up in the club, sipping light.
Peace and blessings. You listen to WEAC Radio, broadcasting live on the radical side of Martin Luther King Avenue here in the underbelly of the nation's capital on Martin Luther King Avenue. Sounds of Chuck Brown Fiesta. We want to dedicate this show to, to Chuck Brown as well. Want to definitely give Chuck some shout outs. That's like my grandfather. It was like losing my grandfather when Chuck left here. But I also want to dedicate this program to Lou Hankins, who mentored me. Was the first to see potential in me, the first to put me on the radio, the first to acknowledge my skills as a writer, as an artist, and the first to treat me like a man. So rest in peace to Big Brother Lou Hankins, former general manager at WPFW. This is a radio family. We do not have room for competition. We're here to bring information to the people and hopefully enlighten them as well. So I have a distinguished guest here today. It's kind of a milestone here for WEAC Radio to have this brother on. Hopefully we can get him into the studio to sign our illustrious wall. But we have him on the line today, and he will be hosting a Anacostia Town Hall somewhat at the Anacostia Playhouse next Wednesday. I do believe that the seats are all filled out, but maybe you can show up anyway and see what we can do to get some speakers outside and carry this information into the street. But my guest really needs no introduction, but let me start by acknowledging that he started on WL and later produced the award-winning local news program, The Daily Drama, on WHUR, and then hosted, of course, the Evening Exchange on WHUT TV at Howard University, and currently host of his own show on WAMU. However, did you know that he was once a member of a theater group who ended up doing a series of children's plays on the radio, and when the station asked him if he could do a news magazine, they said, sure, we can act like news people. And when the job was advertised at HU radio station for a news editor, he thought having played one that he qualified to apply. And he faked them out and got it, and ever since he's been on radio. Welcome to WEAC Radio, Brother Kojo. You are definitely not a fake journalist.
Come on, how'd you find out my backstory like that? Thank you so much for having me join you, and I join you in paying tribute to your late mentor, because you're absolutely right. We're not in competition in this business. We're in coordination.
I love the sounds of that. I just wanted to give you a shout out, man, because this thing I heard about the Carnegie Library shindig that you had with Chuck Brown's band, man, them pictures look something extra, man. I mean, when did that happen?
It happened in 2014, after I'd been at the station for 15 years, or maybe it was 2013, because this is going to be 2016. I will have been at the station for 18 years. So it was 2013, and Chuck had just passed a little while before that.
Okay.
And as you pointed out, we were blessed to have Chuck walk and play among us. And his band was always one of my favorites, because not only did Chuck invent go-go, the sound that distinguishes Washington, but he always had such a good heart. You know, Chuck Brown is the only band leader I have ever met who has never, ever had anyone who played with him become an enemy. Everybody who ever played with Chuck always got paid. He paid his band members first. He paid himself last. I don't know a lot of band members who did that, and that's why they all revere and respect him. to this day, man.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that, brother, because I was doing an event called the Black Love Festival. Unfortunately, part of the gentrification is we lose the loss of our cultural institutions, so we no longer have, the Caribbean Day Parade.
That's right.
For various reasons. We don't have, Georgia Avenue Day. We don't have Malcolm X Day. We don't have Stone Soul Picnic. Black Family Union. I mean, the list goes on and on. I just have to say that, but.
You just reminded me of how much we lost.
How much we lost. And so the Black Love Festival is a small music portion information event we've been doing for a number of years. Hopefully we'll be back this year with the help of Vince DC at the Gateway Pavilion. Having said that, I had a conversation with Chuck trying to get him to perform at the festival. And Chuck calls me back himself, and I wish I had the message he left on my phone. I wish I had it. He said that, he would play for free. I just have to pay his band. He said, I just have to pay the band.
Yep.
And so I called him back and I said, Chuck, this is an AIDS mobilization. This is the independent one. He said, Young Blood, I'm not getting old. I am there. And this is my word. That's the deal. So shout out to Chuck. He was a good dude, and I really do miss him.
We all do.
I got my first question for you this evening, big brother, is, and I feel like I'm talking to like my favorite uncle. I too am not starstruck, but I am freely admitting that your blueprint has really made it possible for cats such as myself. So I want to tip my hat to you on that.
Thank you.
But I heard that you said that you had the sacrifice of a social life in the preparation for your work that you do, and that you had season tickets to the Wizards, and I want to know if you're still giving tickets away.
Well, you're right on the question of sacrificing social life is one of the reasons I got tickets for the Wizards. As you are now in this business, you're in this life, so to speak, you also know how much time you have to spend preparing for what you do, and the more enthusiastic you are about what you do, and you're a very enthusiastic guy, the more motivated you are to spend time doing it. And so it started when Michael Jordan started playing for the Wizards. I used to go to Wizards games occasionally before that time, and then when Jordan came, I said, this is probably going to be my last opportunity to see this guy play on a regular basis, and indeed it was. So that's when I started getting season tickets, and I've got them on and off over the years, because it does give me a form of entertainment in the evening, except when they fall below 50% and start to lose. You hate to see a team losing more than your team is winning.
Yeah.
But I still got tickets, man. I can hook you up anytime you want to go for the rest of the season.
Okay. Yeah, y'all heard it here first.
Hit me up.
Maybe I can finally get a date now. I'm on a losing streak right now. Let's see now. One of the things that I also want to thank you for is in preparation for this interview that I was learning about some of the books that you read, and some of the books was important to you. And one of them, you had listed the brother was Albert Camus. Am I saying his name correctly?
Oh, Albert Camus in the French part of it. Yeah.
Okay, Camus. Okay.
Yes.
And when you mentioned his name ahead of James Baldwin, we had complete agreement on James Baldwin. I had to immediately research this guy. And I just fell in love with him. So now I got to read. Now you just added to my list of books that I have to read. So thank you very much.
Man, can I tell you a quick story about that?
Please do.
I was working, before I came to Washington, D.C., I was working a job on Wall Street in New York, a clerical job that I really hated. And I had heard about Camus' book, L'Étranger, or The Outsider, and then decided to read it because I knew that he had espoused the philosophy of existentialism, and I really didn't know very much about that. And I said, well, maybe this book will help me to understand it. And then when I read the book, the main character in the book, who was like me, a clerk, I felt so much of the same thing about being kind of outside of society, not feeling the emotions one is supposed to feel when things happen in society. And I said, I got to get out of this. I got to try to find myself more involved in the world that's going on around me. And because of where my consciousness was leading me at that point, that's when I decided to join, briefly, the Black Panther Party in New York. So that's the Albert Camus story.
That's a hell of an arc right there, Wall Street to Black Panther Party. That's,
Yep.
We can get into that. I want to share two quick quotes from Brother Albert Camus.
Yep.
Okay. The only way to deal with the unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I collect quotes, so
Yep.
you have contributed to my collection.
That's a great one.
And the second one that really stood out to me was, in the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer.
Yeah,
and
that's another great one.
Yeah, these things, they can sustain us. They can sustain us in the hardships that we have to face. But since we still on the Black Panther tip, let's and shout out to the Black Panther Party 50th anniversary.
Sure.
Just want to put that out there.
And the great documentary that was done on the Black Panther Party by Stanley Nelson.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. There was some criticisms of it and da-da-da, but to his defense, Stanley said, look, that the party and what they meant and what happened, you can make 8 films about that experience and come up with different perspectives on it. I don't think there's one definitive, but I think that we need to acknowledge the contributions that has been made.
It was a great contribution. And the thing about criticism is that I like to say, especially these days, that when we are activists or part of movements ourselves, then we have an obligation to be self-critical, and we have an obligation after we're self-critical to be equally critical of our leaders, because if we're not, then we turn what's supposed to be a movement into a religion. And
Absolutely.
You don't want to go there.
Absolutely. And I had some people, shout out to Beyonce, doing her hot sauce at the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And, there was people saying, this was not a great homage to the Black Panther Party because they was all, skimpy dressed and da-da-da. And then I immediately posted a picture of Kathleen Cleveland in a miniskirt.
There you go. Because there were the miniskirts and the hot pants that were going in those days, my friend.
Yeah, come on now. Let's not lose focus,
Thank you.
Yeah, but tell me about your relationship with Ta-Nehisi Coates' dad.
Paul Coates? Paul Coates, well, a long time ago, I was working at Drum and Spear Bookstore, which was, I think, one of the first black bookstores in Washington, certainly in the 1960s. And I started working at Drum and Spear in the early 1970s. And we used to do book exhibits in various locations if there was a conference going on, because at Drum and Spear in Northwest Washington, we sold a lot of books at the beginning of the school year, because a lot of Howard students would come in looking for books they wanted to get. At holiday times, especially over the December, Christmas holidays, when people would be looking for books for gifts, but a lot of times during the rest of the year, it was slow. And so we would go to black conferences. In those days, there were a lot of conferences of the black social workers, etc., and we would set up a book display at those conferences and sell a lot of books. And there was a conference of some kind in Baltimore. I don't remember exactly what the conference was, but we went up there, a friend and I, because Drum and Spear was a small operation, so I was on my own, but I got a friend to go with me. And we set up our book display. We selected a spot to set up our book display, and I went off to take a restroom break or something. And when I came back, my friend was in a heated argument with this other guy who came from an operation called Black Books Incorporated, I think it was called. And they had this furious argument about who should occupy this space, because it was the prime space for selling books. And we managed to settle it, and we both occupied this space. We decided that there was enough room for both of us to occupy that space. Well, fast forward about 20 years, and I go to the Moreland Spingarn room at Howard University, and there's a mild-mannered librarian there who looks very familiar to me. And I say, excuse me, do I know you from someplace? I seem to remember you being that guy in Baltimore. He said, yeah, I used to run black books in Baltimore. It was such a complete contrast to the person I had remembered seeing 20 years ago, when we were both obviously much younger, that we immediately became friends at that point, and we've been pretty close friends ever since. Even though there were things about Paul that I did not know at the time. I had a friend here named Malik Edwards, who used to be the head of the Black Panther Party here in Washington, and after I started working in television, we wanted to do a show about the Black Panther Party, and I called Malik up to be a guest. And he said, better than me would be Paul Coates. I said, Paul Coates? The guy from Black Books? He said, I said, the mild-mannered librarian of power? He said, yes, Paul used to be the chair of the Black Panther Party in Baltimore. I was like, what? And we invited Paul on the show. Paul has a fascinating history, and of course, in his children in general, and Tallahassee in particular, it looks like he has a fascinating future also.
Yeah. And you've done something when you identified through your children. So I apologize to Mr. Paul Coates for introducing him through his son, but I wanted to immediately let the audience know who he was. You have said that one of your goals was to make sure that the competition of ideas is a fair one. Do you think you've been successful in that, or is that something that's constantly being pursued?
It's something that's constantly being pursued. Sometimes we gain ground, sometimes we lose ground. I think the Black Lives Matter movement came forward at a time when we seemed to be losing ground, but I always felt that it is fair to compete in the arena of ideas, and that if the ideas that you bring to that arena are backed up by, are based on objective reality, are based on known phenomena, then your ideas would ultimately prevail in the competition in the arena of ideas. But obviously there's a lot more that often goes on in that arena than just ideas. Okay. If we look at our political system today, especially if you look at the presidential primaries that are being undertaken now, you realize that in what should be a competition of ideas, what has emerged is really a competition of money, simply who has more money. But I always felt that in a fair competition of ideas, I liked the idea, I liked the notion that in that competition of ideas, the ideas that were grounded in reality would more than likely prevail. In a lot of ways, I've kind of dedicated my whole life to that proposition.
Okay, and a great life it has been. You've said, coming from British colonial Guyana, home of some of the world's most beautiful women, that you
How do you know this?
All the Guyanese women that I've ever seen, of course, they have all got bad taste in men, because I can't get a date with a Guyanese woman. But nevertheless, you said that you felt the need to make more aggressive demands of the white power structure. You mentioned that you rebelled against all the mores of your parents' generation, which you saw too heavily influenced by imperialism. And I have to admit that while rebelliousness is a part of youth, but with the notion that youth is wasted on the young primarily because when they are rebels without a cause. But do you think that the subsequent generations that have followed, including mine and the ones after me, are rebelling against the mores of their parents' generation, which may be seen as too heavily influenced by capitalism?
I think in large measure, you're correct. I love one of my favorite quotes, since you mentioned the quote, is the Frantz Fanon quote that says, "It is the role of each generation out of relative obscurity to discover its mission and either fulfill it or betray it." And I think that to a large extent, generations of African Americans have, in fact, discovered their mission and usually fulfilled it, and not very often betrayed it. And you're right, rebelliousness tends to be a characteristic of youth. But when we started rebelling in what was then British Guiana, it was more than rebelling against our parents, because we were rebelling against the British colonial society in which we lived and the British colonial mores that dominated that society. It started with little things like when we went to school, we had school uniforms with which you had to wear ties. The minute we exited the school grounds, we would take our ties off because we felt that was a constraint put upon us. We felt that we were living in a tropical, very hot country, and we were given uniforms to wear that suggested that we were living in a colder climate someplace. And those were forms of rebellion to which our parents objected, because they felt that this was not the proper thing to do. So we expanded that rebellion against everything that was considered proper to do. We stopped wearing socks with our shoes to school. and tried in every single way possible to demonstrate that defiance. At that point, it was youthful, it was disorganized, but it was sincere. And after a while, we realized that that kind of youthful, exuberant demonstration wasn't really serving much of a purpose unless it led us to a higher level of consciousness, a better understanding of the relationship between the lives we were leading and British colonialism, the relationship between British colonialism and racism, the relationship between racism and imperialism, and on and on and on.
Well, you're alluding to a cultural, I think a global cultural crisis that we have, where, young people are being pushed to, jobs that for the sole purpose of making money. Let's be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an engineer. That art thing is not going to work. That social justice thing is not going to work. They don't pay you to go to, the Peace Corps, things like that. Because I know I was simply told to, study hard, get a good job. No one ever mentioned to me about justice or, God forbid, even happiness. And so that's the issue. And I was just listening to WPF today because, again, we said is coordination, collaboration, and not competition. Right. And I was listening to WPFW, and Ozzie Davis was on, and I had the pleasure of getting to know Ozzie, wonderful brother. And he said that law and order is not the measurement of civilization. It's the presence of justice. And when you have law and order in an unjust system, that those under the rule of law will lose respect for that system. Do you think that we have, an unsurmountable hump as, the people who have been, designated as the permanent underclass that we may actually not ever overcome? Well,
I'm glad you mentioned Ta-Nehisi Coates earlier because in his last book, the point that he made is that the one thing that is consistent in our lives when he was accused of having a bleak view of the future, he said the one thing that emerges from this is that essentially the struggle continues. What is in the future is struggle. And it just seems to me that even though, as you pointed out, people are encouraged at a very young age to study hard so they can make a lot of money by getting a good job, human beings are social by nature. And so individual accomplishment, while laudable, and I certainly feel that every human being on this earth deserves comfort in his or her life. I am not knocking that at all. Every human being deserves to live a comfortable life, but individual comfort tends not to be satisfying to most of the people that I have associated with in my life. And that is, there's always a broader cause, because being social by nature, we tend to need more than simply individual accomplishment and satisfaction. Social progress is what tends to motivate a lot of us in this world, seeing the people around us when we start with our neighborhoods and expand it to our broader communities, and ultimately the world. And we live in a world now that is so scientifically advanced that the only real challenge that faces us in the future are the ways in which we can end poverty in this world and the ways in which we can end discrimination in this world. Those seem to be bigger challenges than all of the scientific accomplishments that we have made, bigger challenges than all of the individual riches that we have been able to accomplish, and it's a challenge for me that's worth it for generations to come. That's the challenge that generations to come have, and I would like to believe that ultimately that is a challenge that we can meet. But the only thing permanent is, I agree with Ta-Nehisi, struggle. Struggle.
Without struggle, there can be no progress. On the line of Anacostia, Frederick Douglass. You've said that to convince people socialism was the right path, we needed to be effective within a capitalist free enterprise context. Otherwise, we would be seen as disgruntled, unsuccessful activists who couldn't succeed competing in a free enterprise environment. Now, in short, I would call that burnt out activists, a fraternity of which I do not care to join. So how were you able to pivot from activist to arguably an influential player in the D.C. political scene?
It's funny you mentioned that, because that was from my days when I was studying Marxism, and we considered ourselves socialist. I'll let you in on a little secret. When we were at WHUR Radio, even though we were starting to do news, we still harbored our very strong Marxist and socialist aspirations, and we began to realize one thing, that people who in those days were talking about socialism were seen as people who were failures within the capitalist environment, and so nobody would really listen to them. They said, obviously, they're going to embrace an alternative system. Of course, you got to remember that in those days there was still a Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union and China were competing over socialism, but people in the United States who were communist or socialist were seen as people who were essentially failures. So here we were at WHUR Radio at a commercial station at the time, and my then friend Robert Taylor became the manager of that station, and he and a couple of others and I in the station, who were at that time still studying Marxism, said, you know, we run WHUR as complete alternative radio, and we don't get that many listeners, at least not as many listeners as we would like to. And so the notion will persist that here they go again, presenting an alternative that nobody's listening to. I said, if we can make this station, or we said, Robert Taylor and I, and Sandra Ratley said, if we can make this station successful within the capitalist context, then everything we say in our public affairs programs, and all the information that we give, will have more credibility. And so we were playing in those days, we were only playing advanced jazz, we were playing John Coltrane, we were playing Charlie Mingus, et cetera, and we said, at some point we made the decision that, you know what, we're going to have to pump the funk, bro. We're going to have to do that in order to bring people to the news and information programming that we had, which we felt was what was most important about the station. And I got to say, WHUR is the only station I know that's still kind of legacy radio in this town, that a lot of people listen to it because their parents and grandparents listen to it also. And to this day, the Daily Drum, which we created and which was the source of news and information, even though it's smaller now, still exists and people relate to that. But that was our thinking at that point. Sorry for going on for so long.
No problem. You know, pump the funk. I'm all down for that. You know, we recently just lost Bohemian Caverns on U Street, which may be closing the doors on the chapter of Black Broadway on U Street, sadly. One of the books that you have added to my list is Washington's U Street, a biography about the Historical Society, to figure out how new development has to reflect the city's history and evolving culture in a way that bridges racial and economic disparities. Now, of course, I'm sitting here in Anacostia, east of the river. They are getting their forks and knives ready. Development's coming here. We are challenging them to envision development without displacement. We are petitioning the city to accept a proposal from a community land trust for the abandoned Walmart site, and we have the Wizard Stadium coming here to St. Elizabeth. I'm cool with development because I think that, you know, what we see now at the corner of Malcolm X Avenue or Martin King Avenue is deplorable. I'm not trying to defend and preserve blight, but we need to acknowledge that there has to be the city has to make a commitment on whether or not they're serious about preserving and retaining the culture and the people who were here, because the settlers displacing natives is not new. What are they willing to do differently east of the river, since we have already seen what development looks around the city? Just want to get your pushback from that.
I think what happens there, Kymone, depends a great deal on you and others like you. That's what I meant earlier about the challenge that we have in the future in terms of looking at poverty and racism and all forms of discrimination, and that there always has to be struggle. If there is no struggle, if activists in that part of the city and their supporters around the city do not come together to make their voices heard and to have their activities seen, then whatever any developer feels like doing in that part of the city is simply what will happen. The difference between what developers and others want to do and what the residents of that community want depends in large measure on the activities of residents of that community. You cannot, I don't think we've learned that we cannot depend on the goodwill of anyone to simply do what's best for us as a community. We have to try to define what we see as being best for ourselves, and then to plan strategies and tactics to achieve those goals and compete in the arena of ideas, compete in the arena of politics, and compete in the arena of activism in order to do that. Because the people who have the wealth and the people who have what it takes to create a new Wizards Stadium, etc., know exactly what they would like to do. And as you pointed out, yes, you don't want to promote blight in your neighborhood, but you also want to make sure that when development comes to your neighborhood, it A, reflects the values of the community who lives there, and B, preserves accommodation, affordable accommodation for all of the struggling people in that neighborhood who go to work every single day or who are looking to go to work every single day and find it increasingly difficult to be able to afford to live in the city in which they either were born or have chosen to live. So I think a lot of that depends, frankly, on you.
All right, put it on my broad shoulders. I can carry it because I'm inspired by cats like you who have been putting it down. So we're going to do what we can to design a displacement-free zone and carve out a niche for ourselves here east of the river. All right, so I know we're at the bottom of the hour and your time is limited, but before I let you go, we got to squeeze out a Petey Green story, and if we got time, if you got the time, a Marion Barry story too, if you got it in you. But I definitely need to hear the Petey Green. And real quick, Petey Green's nephew, Coeltha Clayton LaBeouf, who is a great critically acclaimed actor. For those who do not recognize his name, you'll recognize him in Something the Lord Made, his Most Death's Brother. You recognize him in what was that? The Wire. As the guy that ran the strip club, and George Pelicanos worked with him. He's a great talent, and he's told me so many stories about Petey, but I would love to hear yours. I
became aware of Petey Green by virtue of what you and I are doing right now. I heard him on the radio, on WOL radio at night. As you pointed out, I started there. We started out doing that children's broadcast there, and Petey was on just before we came on in the evening, or I think just after, and we weren't live, so I'm not sure. We recorded our children's plays, and Petey used to come on at around 9 o'clock at night, and I would hear him there, and he was, in those days, chastising the school board. He used to go to school board meetings, and he thought that they were all acting crazy. And then, when I remember seeing him for the first time, was doing a campaign, I think in the early 70s, maybe late 60s, early 70s, for when Walter Fauntroy was first running for a non-voting delegate in D.C., and they were right across the street from the bookstore. Drum and Spear Bookstore was located at 1371 Fairmont Street, right on the corner of 14th and Fairmont, which, those were Petey's stomping grounds in those days.
Okay. And
Fauntroy was trying to conduct a meeting, and Petey was heckling the hell out of him at that meeting. And I said, oh, that's the Petey Green. I had a completely different image of what he would look like. He was tall, he was red. I always imagined him being short and dark, but he was completely different than what I thought he looked like. And then, after I got into the business myself, Petey started doing a television show that aired on what was then Channel 20 here, and he recorded it at a studio in Virginia. And I had been a guest on the show before, and then he invited me to be a guest on the show one evening. And I rode out there, and we talked. The show was half an hour long, and we talked. And after that, Petey said, well, I got one more show to tape here tonight, but my guest isn't here yet, so I don't know. I said, well, do you want me to kind of hang around? Because if necessary, I could do another show with you. He said, no, I can do it by myself. I said, what do you mean you can do the show by yourself? He said, I can do the show by myself. I'll be my own damn guest. I said, really? He said, yeah, I can do that. So then I did stick around because I decided that I had to see. About 10 minutes later, the guest didn't show up. PD took a seat in front of the camera. They turned the camera on, counted down, and P.D. Green looked into that camera and talked non-stop for half an hour, as if he had prepared this entire lecture that he was delivering before a class of students. It was the most amazing thing up until that point I had ever seen on television in my life. And he never broke a sweat. Of course, later on when I would learn about exactly how P.D. had lived practically his whole life by being able to talk his way into or out of just about any situation, I wasn't really surprised. But, of course, you know the famous story, the famous P.D. Green story, I'm sure his nephew told you about when he was in Lorton and essentially talked his way out of prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk is, I never heard it put that way, but yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Yes, he did.
That is exactly what happened. Any Marion Barry story you got time to share? I want to shout out real quick that I was disgusted utterly by Colbert King's article comparing Marion Barry to Donald Trump. Just want to put that out there. But
yeah, that was a strange kind of comparison for Colby to make.
That's I got words for him, but I'm gonna be polite.
When Marion Barry was decided that he would not run for mayor again after the infamous Vista Hotel incident. My favorite Marion Barry story really isn't about Marion Barry at all in this way. He decided that he would make that announcement that he would no longer run again on Evening Exchange, the show I was hosting on WHUT, and needless to say that attracted a great deal of attention. The press was assembled outside the station because the show was live, and so all of the other stations would have wanted him to make that announcement on their station, were envious, and so they were all crowded outside. On that occasion, he brought with him his wife, Effie Barry, at that time, and his wife-to-be, Cora Masters, was also in that crew. But he also brought his mother. And we had a cameraman named Calvin Barry, who is now a cameraman at Rita Channel 26 here in Washington, who is the only child of Marion Barry's sister. And when they walked into the studio, Marion and Effie and Marion's mother looked up at the whole set and said, "Calvin!" And she and Calvin Barry ran over and embraced. And for the only time in his life that I ever remember, nobody in the room was paying any attention to Marion Barry. Because the embrace of Calvin's grandmother and Calvin was what everybody had their eyes on that time. And Marion said, "See there? And that boy Calvin, he never comes to see me, but he gets all the attention." But that's my favorite Marion Barry story.
Okay.
It's a Calvin Barry story.
Okay, all right. I appreciate you sharing that, brother. I appreciate you sharing that. We're here to tell the stories. I want to thank you again for taking the time out to speak with us here today, and thank you for all the work that you've been doing. And hopefully I get to sit next to you at a Wizard game or take a ticket from you. And I just want to acknowledge that one of the things that I learned that we have in a similarity. Of course, I've told you I'm watching your movements. I'm studying your blueprint, and I'm trying to pivot myself. But when you decided to change your name, I did it as well. The name that you chose, Ndami, is from Ndami Azikiwe. Am I saying that correctly, brother?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Nigeria's first president after
Correct.
British colonialism, who went to HU. And graduated from Lincoln University. I believe that's Langston Hughes and Gil Scott Heron's alma mater.
Yep.
You didn't know Gil, did you?
I knew Gil very well.
Oh.
Gil lived here in Washington. He lived over on 12th Street Northwest. And when he put together the Midnight Band, he used to spend a lot of time in the music library at WHUR Radio. He came around a lot in those days because, well, he was here used to teach at Federal City College for a little while, which is the predecessor to UDC. So he was very well known around town, and he and I had the distinction of both being turned away from an upscale club known as the Foxtrap in those days, because in the Foxtrap, to get in, you had to wear a jacket and tie, and Gil and I went over there one evening, and we were both wearing dashikis, and they said, y'all can't come in here. I said, but this is Gil Scott-Heron. We don't care who he is. He's not coming in here tonight.
Oh, my goodness.
So, yeah, we both got turned away from the Foxtrot back in the day.
Oh, my goodness. We're going to have to talk about Gil again, man, so I get a little deep into that. But thank you for, again, sitting in with us this evening.
And I got to tell you, man, allow me to interrupt, please, because with the preparation that you have done for this show and all of the quotes you have and the research you've done, I can see you not having much of a social life yourself, man.
Unfortunately, that is true. Unfortunately, that is between that and my 6-year-old has really put a damper on things. But I'm here to do the work, and I've realized now that I wasted many of my years because youth is wasted on the young. So because I wasted those years. Thank you, brother. So salute to you. I look forward to seeing you next week if I can get in there. I know you got a packed house coming for your town hall at Anacostia Playhouse next Wednesday at 6:30. Please join Kojo in the community as we continue to pick up the baton and run with it on the radical side of Martin Luther King Avenue. And taking us home is one of his favorites, Nat King Cole's Nature Boy. Salute to you, brethren.
Thank you very much. Come on.
One love.
One love.
There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy. They say he wandered very far over land and sea. A little shy and sad of eye, but very wise was he. And then one day, a magic day, he passed my way. And while we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me: the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return.
Hey, what's going on? This is TDH from Flint, Michigan. All I got to say is arrest Snyder now. Get him out the office, because we at radio. Now do something. Get him out the office.